Welcome to Sacred Realms. It's a great day in Hyrule, y'all. Welcome to Sacred Realms, a Zelda Retrospective Podcast. I'm your host, Lyndon Willoughby. I am joined on this gorgeous Texas fall evening. I love it so much. I'm drinking stout beer. I'm smoking a cigar. This is my time. And I am joined on this most wonderful of evenings by my co-host, Matt Willoughby. How you doing, Matt?
I am equally fantastic, although not equally located, which is a bit of a twist, a turn of fate, as they might say. The Rona has struck again, and we have had to separate for a short period of time. So, but alas, even though we are not co-located,
I feel like co-located might be a word. Like
loquacious is definitely a word.
If you have like
wordy.
If two people are speaking at the same time, is that colloquation?
If they're speaking in an equally verbose fashion, I would say that is most likely colloquation, which really you could describe our podcast as a colloquation.
There you go. You heard it here first, everybody.
Colloquation. But no, I am enjoying the weather on the patio of the parents' house, and man, it just doesn't get much better than this. You know what, though, Lyndon? It doesn't get much better than the guests that we have. One of those being with us this evening. That would be your friend and colleague, Mr. Maximus Nichols. So we're glad to have him back on. Welcome, Max.
That's not his name.
See you again, my friend.
That's not his name.
Maximus, isn't it?
No,
or was it?
It's Maximum.
Maximum.
It's Maximum Nichols.
Right. Maximum Nichols. Welcome, Maximum Nichols.
Thank you. Hello, Internet. I'm glad to be back.
Hey, Max. We are very happy to have you back on. Of course, we have not spoken yet in this back half of Season 6 of Sacred Realms Pod. And, I think one of the things that's been sort of nice about the fact that these 8-bit games are a little bit shorter in length than the games we typically play. Also we're kind of condensing the games typically 2 dungeons to a week, so they go by faster. One of the nice things about that kind of abbreviated episode length for the Adventure of Link is that we are able to kind of have we're able to have a different guest on for each one and to have, I think, what is going to end up being a wildly diverse lineup of perspectives and opinions about this game. And I can't wait to get into yours because just based on some of the chatter that I've seen from you to other people in our Discord chat since we started this game, I feel like, if nothing else, your opinions on it are going to be quite a bit different from our guest last week, which was, of course, Josh from ZU, noted #1 Zelda 2 fanboy. So
yes,
yeah.
Spoiler alert: I am not going to have the same opinions as Josh on the Adventure of Link.
I feel like most people probably don't have the exact same opinions as Josh on the Adventure of Link, but that's one of the great things about kind of analyzing these older games with a critical eye and kind of having to take into account the variation of nostalgia and everything else that people bring into their experience with these older games. So the opinions do tend to run the gamut, I have found. So
yeah, I listened to half of the episode Josh was in before here. I didn't get through all of it, but listening to his thoughts maybe tempered my own somewhat. I will be slightly less spicy maybe than I would have been if I hadn't had Josh's opinions in my ears first.
Well, that's interesting because I'm coming into this episode feeling like I might be slightly less spicy than I was last week. So we're all just mellowing out over here. Or I don't know. Max and I are. I don't know about Matt.
I am very much not mellowing out.
Oh, he's got some opinions. He's feeling feisty over there. Well, we will figure out what exactly Matt means by that later in the episode. For now, Max, I want to ask, how you doing, man? What have you been up to?
I'm doing well. hunkering down from this wildfire smoke that permeates all of the Pacific Northwest right now. But I've been playing some Zelda. I've been playing some Xenoblade. I just bought a book that maybe I'll read. I never get around to actually reading much these days. Rings of Power is really good. It makes me want to read the Silmarillion for the 13th time or something. I love that book.
Okay, so this is how we get 2-hour episodes. Is all these fun rabbit trails that we end up with. I was talking to Matt about Rings of Power the other day because I finished the season. I don't know if you have, Max.
I have.
Okay, Matt, I think is how many episodes behind are you, Matt?
The last one I watched was episode 4.
Okay.
Yeah,
so
4.
you've got like half a season left. So Matt and I both are also pretty big fans of the Silmarillion and the Tolkien legendarium. I think I know that some people are really down that rabbit hole, and I think for Matt and I about the densest that we really get with it is the Silmarillion, and then we have to listen to it on audiobook because it's a pretty it's a pretty girthy tome. But love that story, and I'm definitely very familiar with it. And so for that reason was kind of bringing a lot of our fandom of the Silmarillion into this show. And I think kind of where Matt's at with it right now is that he kind of feels, not to speak for him, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but he feels a little off-put by some of the changes that have kind of been happening to some of the specificity around lore and events and whatnot, and I don't know, I'm kind of having the opposite thing with it. I'm actually really enjoying the show, basically for the same reason that I enjoy the Lord of the Rings movie trilogy, which is that I feel like it's a very exciting and beautiful broad strokes adaptation of a much denser novel.
Yeah. I enjoy it in the same way a hardcore Marvel fan enjoys the Marvel movies.
Yeah.
Right? They're not the same thing. It's not a one-to-one adaptation of the thing that I love already. Although, honestly, I haven't read the book in like 10, 15 years, so I don't remember half of it anyways. I'm watching it with my wife, who has not read the Silmarillion or any of the books other than The Hobbit. And I finally, like, I'm sitting here the whole time, like squirming in my chair, like when some famous character comes on, I'm like, oh, it's, I don't know, it's Celeborn. And wanting to like just tell her why this is so important and so amazing and so cool to see on screen. And like, she doesn't know, like, she would not be as excited as I was, no matter how much I try to explain why it's exciting. So I'm kind of just like, I now know what it's like when I was in like watching a Marvel movie in the theater and somebody would like cheer at a name, and I'm like, ugh, comics fans, right? Nope. Now I'm in that chair.
Oh man, you're telling me that your wife didn't understand why you were like falling out of your seat when there were black flags flying over the harbor of Numenor, for instance.
Yeah. And I'm like sitting here trying to like, I'm internally debating like which of these characters are going to become the Nazgul. And, like,
right.
She's not as interested in theory crafting on that front as I am.
Does she enjoy it though? Because I've been very curious.
She does.
That's cool. I've been very curious how well this show was going to be able to catch on with people who have maybe like, I don't know, would say that they're passing fans of the movies, and that's about as far as it goes for them.
So she's enjoying it, and she's only seen the movie trilogy once when it was in theaters.
Oh, so she hasn't even seen the good versions.
She's not even a passing fan of the movies. Like, she thought they were good, and then she never thought about them again. But so even someone in her position is enjoying this show.
Well, that's good. I'm glad to hear that. I have limited time to work with right now, so I kind of had to make a decision about whether or not I was going to keep up on a week-to-week basis with Rings of Power, House of the Dragon, or Andor. And so I chose Rings of Power. I'm now catching up on Andor, and House of the Dragon will come after it. But we're kind of spoiled on good entertainment at the moment, which is nice because because, you know, the world continues to be actually kind of a place at the moment, but there's fun stuff to watch.
It drives me a little bit more crazy every episode that she doesn't know who Isildur is. She doesn't remember who he is and what he did or did not do in the movie trilogy.
She was not there, Gandalf. She was not there 3,000 years ago.
You better use the audio cues here, Lyndon.
Those are harder to find than you would think, honestly. But
really?
I'll try. Yeah, I'll try.
Okay.
Well, cool. I'm glad that we're all finding stuff to watch that we're enjoying quite a bit. That's always nice to hear. Matt, you know, are you going to get caught up on it? I really encourage you to do so.
I will.
It's great.
Yeah, no, I will. I'll probably. I mean, it's crazy busy season for work, and obviously, you know, been traveling a lot the last 4 weeks really, and so I'm trying to. I want to do it justice by watching it on a TV instead of on my phone. That's part of the struggle, and then because like part of the whole thing is that it's just, like, supposedly a cinematic masterpiece, like Peter Jackson's trilogy was, and I've really enjoyed the cinematography of the episodes I've seen so far, and I want to get the full experience, so I don't want to watch it on my phone on an airplane. Just finding time to sit down and watch all of that is definitely on my list of things to do, and I will be watching it through the end of season 1 at least.
Gotcha. Yep. Good stuff. Totally. Your reasoning checks out, and I'm totally aligned with you on your thinking. So we'll catch up on this at a later date. Of course, before that happens, we have some other things to talk about. Other things that have been diverting our attention on a week-to-week basis. Of course, that is the video game that we're here to talk about, which is definitely something that we've all have all had top of the mind for the last few weeks. I think maybe more so for you and I, Max, than for Matt, because we played 1 or 2 games so far that Matt has not played. But definitely for myself, I think that the games that we played in seasons 1 through 5 were all kind of, in their own different way, comfort blanket experiences for me. You know, they're all... I have varying levels of nostalgia for all of them. It's always a fun time. Like, I always feel very comfortable in those games. I never feel like I'm kind of on my back foot or anything like that. Not so the Adventure of Link. This is uncharted territory 100%, and I know that it's a very similar thing for you. So before we get into the Sacred Realms rundown, what I want to do is I want to do a similar thing to what we did last week with Josh, where I ask you I guess a little bit different question, because with Josh, he's got a lot of historical knowledge and everyone knows he loves this game. But for you, kind of going down this rabbit hole with us for the first time, I want to figure out, where are you generally at with the Adventure of Link at the moment?
So I played through to about the 3rd dungeon, which we're about to talk about. I won't go into too much detail there. And I met a certain enemy, and I was save stating and rewinding and stuff. And I was having to do that a lot and having kind of a miserable time, to be honest. And my hands were hurting from rewinding so much and redoing the same actions. And I put down the game and I was like, I don't know if I can keep playing this to appear on the podcast. Like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to play the content I'm supposed to talk about. I might have to give Lyndon and Matt the bad news that I rage quit Adventure of Link in a huff. But what I did then was I found an alternative way to play, so to speak, that involved some hackery and a easy mode that was fan created, where I did... Link does more damage, enemies deal less damage, and spells cost less.
Would that be a 3-letter word that rhymes with bomb?
It would indeed. So I have been playing that way, and I like it so much more now that the super harsh difficulty curve is kind of alleviated. Like, underneath that brutal balancing of the difficulty with punishing penalties for failure is a game that I do actually enjoy. And it feels a little bit more like what I look for from a Zelda game.
Yeah. And so tell me again, in what ways is the difficulty lessened on the version that you're playing?
So Link deals more damage.
Okay.
Maybe only with the sword, but I'm actually not sure if there's much else that does damage. I guess the fireballs.
Yeah.
So Link does more damage and enemies do less damage to you.
Okay.
And spells cost less magic to cast.
Yeah, it's really interesting that you say that because I know that in the last episode, one of the things that I really commented on was that to me, the thing that was contributing to my lack of enjoyment, minute to minute in the game was really the health system and the fact that there were no frequent health drops of any kind. And the fact that I felt like I was always kind of like running around at more or less like one hit to death, and I think what you're saying honestly kind of amounts to the same thing, at least in part, right? Where, if Link takes less damage from enemies, then it really is just extending the amount of punishment that you can sort of take. And I can definitely see where that would create a much more fun gameplay experience because there is a really interesting kind of loop that happens in this game where, you refill your health via magic and you're trying to scavenge magic drops kind of above anything else, really. That's kind of your main thing that you're hoping to see while you're kind of going through a dungeon and you're kind of going from enemy to enemy. And then once you get the magic drop, you're just kind of waiting until the bar fills up enough for you to be able to refill your life again or whatever. And I definitely think that the combat on its own is difficult enough to where Link could have been much more spongy and his magic could have been quite a lot. His magic capacity could have been quite a lot deeper, and it still would have been an equally challenging. I guess not equally challenging, but it still would have been a perfectly challenging video game experience without feeling as punishing as it currently does.
Yeah, there's a certain degree of so when we think about game difficulty, there's a bunch of different axes of difficulty in any game, right? Like in Destiny, the game that we both work on, you could say that one axis of difficulty is thumb skill, right? Are you good at aiming? Are you good at jumping and dodging and moving, converting your thoughts through the controller into the character's actions? And other types of difficulty might be stuff like, are you like social difficulty? Are you able to gather a fire team? There's kind of like reading the situation difficulty. Like, are you able to quickly understand and get situational awareness of everything around you? And like, there's just not a million. There's a bunch of ways to break down difficulty like this. And Adventure of Link, basically, I don't think they did this, in a way like consciously, like I'm talking about it right now, but they basically ended up taking every axis of difficulty and just dialing all of them up to 10 at once, and that creates kind of this exponential feeling of difficulty and punishment, where the fact that it's so easy to lose in a one-on-one fight over a few seconds with an iron knuckle, and it's also a starvation economy where you don't get health refills and you don't get that much magic. And it's also a high penalty for failure because you lose your XP and you have to travel all the way back. These things add up and kind of multiply each other to create a fairly punishing experience here.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's so interesting because I was thinking today, I play quite a lot of indie games on my Switch, and a lot of them are kind of in that faux 8 or 16-bit art style. And that isn't super material to the point that I want to make from an aesthetic standpoint, but with that tends to come a design mentality that's rooted in things that were established in this era, like when games like this were being created. But, they've been heavily modernized, right? Like Shovel Knight is one that we've kind of mentioned every now and again, that I think, with the arrival of the downward stab this week, this game is feeling more Shovel Knight-y to me by the minute. But you've got games like Shovel Knight that have a similar kind of experience as this game, but have managed to modernize a lot of the more archaic, kind of thoughts and feelings around what difficulty should consist of. The one that I was thinking of the other day was actually Celeste, which is definitely not like an apples to apples comparison to this game, because Celeste is a pure platformer really, and it doesn't have any of the combat or leveling or any of that stuff that Adventure of Link has. But what Celeste does have is a situation where each room that you find yourself in is punishingly difficult within the parameters of what the gameplay is. There, each room for the most part is a very difficult puzzle platform experience, and most people die a ton. I die a ton in each room, when I play that game. But one thing that game did that I think was so great was that it realized the difficulty was fun in and of itself, and what we don't need to do on top of that is to add lives or game overs or anything that kind of even further artificially creates frustration around loss, around like falling into a pit or whatever. Like in Celeste, when you die, you can do that infinitely, and every single time you just reappear at the entrance to the room that you died in. And I don't know. I think that obviously that's something that never would have happened in a game from Adventure of Link's era, but I'm definitely glad that it's something that's kind of being shed now in games that are heavily inspired by games of that era, right? Because I think that if the gameplay that you're experiencing in an area is fun enough, even if it's punishingly difficult, that kind of stands on its own, I think. And I think that Adventure of Link could be the same way, in an alternate world where maybe there's like 2 blue iron knuckles in a room or whatever. And yeah, that sounds hard, but if they kill me 15 times, then it's much less of a hassle for me. Like I'm going to be using the rewind feature much less because I'm not having to warp all the way back to North Castle or whatever, That's kind of a fun sounding game to me.
So Celeste is a great example because Celeste does exactly what you're talking about to a much greater degree than almost any other game I can think of, where they really Maddie Thorson, the head designer of that game,
yep.
She really did dial the difficulty up pretty high as a default for most of the rooms, most of the platforming. And there is not any other avenue for difficulty to go up. You're not punished. She didn't make it hard to read the situation. You can generally tell what's happening, what things are. It's not like Sonic where you're moving too fast and you kind of run into an obstacle before you see it sometimes. Like you can always see everything that's there. So yeah, just kudos, good example. And it had elements of like opting into higher difficulty stuff. Like you could collect all the stars or whatever they were, which was just this purely optional thing you could opt into trying to do. And it was much harder than getting through the level. And I don't even think it gave you anything. It was just a thing you might want to do. And that's a type of way to layer in higher difficulty without making it punishing.
Yeah. Yeah, I definitely agree with that. So I guess to tie up this section of the conversation, because we're going to get into more later when we talk about the dungeons and general thoughts and feelings about this specific section of the game. But generally speaking, do you feel like you're getting any of the big Zelda feels from this game that you look for, or that you associate with this series? Like any of those things that really made you fall in love with Zelda in the first place?
No. I am not. I think the things I love about Zelda games are, well, okay, I should add a little more nuance there, a little bit. But yeah, Matt's saying he has a little something to add on the table.
Yeah, no, I want you to finish your thought. I want you to finish your thought, and we can go back to it. But.
Okay. But yeah, like the things I love about the Zelda series are a sense of exploration, a sense of plumbing mysteries, a sense of place. I like feeling in kind of a like through my senses that the game is presenting, which is usually just, eyes and ears, like I am in the place that the game is portraying, immersion, basically. So like that's the kind of stuff I like about Zelda games, and I don't care about the combat typically very much. I like combat in Zelda games as a way to texture the rest of that experience and to provide a little bit of like resistance and a sense of earning these other things that I enjoy.
Yeah.
But Adventure Link doesn't really emphasize those things very much. It does in a few ways. Like it's actually pretty exciting and satisfying when you're like, there's a weird little copse of trees over there standing by itself. I'm going to go see what's there. And then you arrive and it takes you to a hidden area and you're like, oh yeah, I knew it. Like that sense of discovery is very Zelda.
Yeah.
And honestly, that has more telegraphing to it, more of a visual hook to attract your attention than the secrets in Zelda 1 often did.
Sure.
Yeah, like I was going to say the same thing, Max. Like it has the secrets it does have are telegraphed in such a way that they're almost not even secrets. It's like a cave with a rock in front of it. I know I need to go smash this rock and go into this cave and there will be something in it. A copse of trees that's by itself. A clearing in the middle of a swamp, or like the king's tomb that we find this week that doesn't really serve any purpose except for being there. And the only reason I went there was because it's this lone cross standing in a clearing. And I was like, maybe something's over there. Like it's all telegraphed.
Yeah. And it's telegraphed, but it's not explicit. So you still get that feeling of discovery that I look for from a Zelda game.
Yeah, and that's pretty classic. I mean, all of those examples that you mentioned, though, Matt, like, yes, they are obvious to us now, especially, but I think that Zelda games, even up through Breath of the Wild, have relied on similar techniques. I think like, the grove of trees that's standing by itself in the overworld. To me, that's a very like Korok seed puzzle sort of thing, right? Where it's like we like the visual language of that by itself, we now associate with being able to find something there in the same way that a circle of stones with one missing, always says Korok seed, right?
Yeah. I'm not saying like telegraphing is bad in and of itself. I'm saying I think that it is primitively iterated on here. Obviously it's the first, right? Like it's the first time that they're really telegraphing, because the thing we always said about Zelda 1 was there is zero telegraphing of any kind in any way, shape, or form. So like I feel like they went from that to let's just telegraph the crap out of it in the overworld, and then in the dungeon there's still not much. So like
it's definitely interesting. I want to just to pick up on one thing that you said about the combat, because I know we've talked about this in past games, that to you the exploration is the main thing, and I think I typically mostly agree with you, Max. I think the combat to me is one of those things where when it's just fine, I enjoy it well enough, and it's just texture, like you're saying. For the games that the combat system manages to like transcend a little bit and to actually be a little bit more involved and fun than other Zelda games, I do find that is like, just some extra juice that typically endears me to that game just a little bit more. Matt, you'll find out about that a little bit with Wind Waker when we get to it next season.
Mm-hmm.
But what I will say is that I think it's so interesting because Zelda 2 is so unique. We've said this before, but obviously combat is such a huge part of this game. And I was just trying to put like a number to it just now, thinking in my head, like, how much of your time do you typically spend in combat in other Zelda games? And I would say it's probably something like 25% of your time in the 3Ds and about 40 to 50% in the top downs, with the other chunk being exploration, right? And I would say that this game is pretty much the inverse of that. It's 25% exploration and the entire rest is combat. And so for that reason, I definitely understand why it's not really doing too much for you.
By the way, the high difficulty was intentional. I know we're talking about combat right now, but kind of one and the same, right? I have a quote that I found from
He's got
Tadashi
a quote.
Sugiyama, who was the director of Adventure of Link.
Nice.
He's got a quote. He's got a quote. He's got a quote. He's got a dream from Monty Python.
Yeah.
There we go.
He said this was in 2016. He said the foundation of action games at the time of Zelda 2 was to feel difficult for everyone. Games didn't have a ton of content, so in order to have them played for as long as possible, we felt like we couldn't make them easily clearable. We also did debugging, so we would play the game too much, and the game would have a high difficulty that was interesting to us, aka the dev team. So I think there's a couple interesting things there, right? One of them was they literally intentionally made it harder in order to draw out the playtime, which is a very arcadey design aesthetic, right? Like that's what the business of arcades demanded. I think somebody mentioned that in one of the previous episodes.
I think we talked about that with Josh.
Yeah. And Josh said, had some insight to this, which was that because arcades was where a lot of this design foundation was coming from, people were bringing what they learned about how to make arcade games to console games. So that's why we have like life systems and like artificially drawn out playtime and high difficulty, because that's how arcades worked. That's how they made money.
Yeah, and I definitely see that, and I think once you kind of that quote is definitely very telling, and once you start thinking about how much, like if you were to cut your combat time in half in this game, it all of a sudden becomes a much briefer game, right? Like these dungeons do not, I mean, I wouldn't say that they're short, but there's definitely not like there's not enough exploration to be had here to pad out a game for hours more, so that definitely kind of makes sense. It doesn't mean that I like it anymore, but I definitely understand kind of where they were coming from and what their aim was. Okay, well, let's get into some housekeeping, and then let's talk about this chunk of game that we played. If you didn't know, Sacred Realms is a weekly re-examination of The Legend of Zelda, one little slice at a time. Sacred Realms drops every Wednesday and is available on all major podcast networks. Every week, we take a new section of a Zelda game, we play it, and then we sit down here to talk and to drop our hot takes about it. If that sounds fun to you, please head over to Apple Podcasts, hit that subscribe button, be sure to leave us a review. 5-star reviews are greatly appreciated, and they have a chance to get a shout out here on the show. If you want more Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/Sacred Realms Pod. There you can get access to our Discord channel, which is hopping. Lots of great people in there talking about Zelda on a day-to-day basis. You can get access to listener mail. You can vote on what game we play next, which all of our patrons just got finished doing, and we haven't announced it on the podcast as of yet, but here it is. Season 7 of Sacred Realms will be covering The Legend of Zelda, The Wind Waker. So that's going to be
very excited for that one.
That's going to be such a fun time. Oh my gosh, I cannot wait to play that game. It's been 4 years since I played that game, and I've been jonesing for it. So it's going to be a great time. Of course, one of the benefits that Master Sword patrons and above receive is that we read their names every week here on the show. Those legendary individuals are loading. Tiffany the Star, Daxel, Patrice, Darknuck, Brian, George, Mike, Dylan, Allie, Lennon, Kolku, Rowan, Josh, Nick, Keep It Going, Dante, Gep, Brittany, Davey, Haru the Mighty, Derek, Albert, Mark, Andy, Cameron, Tyler, Ben, Daniel, Nick D_TV, Travis, Christian, Jonathan, Hyrule Interviews, a.k.a. Maximum Nichols, your guest of the evening, Garrett, and Drew. These are all legendary individuals. We could not make the podcast without their generous support. We have gotten to know many of these people through our interactions in the Discord channel and have found them all to be capital folks. So yeah, definitely appreciate all of your support. You are the best of the best. But without further ado, let's talk about what we played. We do that every week in the Sacred Realms Rundown, which is a 6-part analysis of what we played this week and the feelings that it made us feel. Today, we are covering The Adventure of Link, Chapter 3, which takes us to Island Palace and Maze Island Palace. We're island hopping this week. It's going to be a good time. Part 1 of the Sacred Realms Rundown is the plot recap, usually read by Matt. This week, also read by Matt. Matt, take it away.
As we continue our journey through Hyrule, we have more palaces to find and crystals to place. But we know that some of the palaces lie beyond the Eastern Sea, so we must find a way to traverse the vast body of water. To start our search, we head to the easternmost town of mainland Hyrule, the town of Mido. Here we learn the downward thrust from a Hylian knight, which increases sword damage when attacking enemies from above. We also take the water of life that we found in a random cave during our wanderings to the village wise man, and he teaches us a spell to transform ourselves into a flying fairy, to reach locations that even our increased jump height cannot reach. We do not, however, find a means of transportation across the ocean, so we head south to find inspiration at the tomb of the late king. After crossing the graveyard and avoiding some nasty ghosts, we find the tomb of the king and pay our respects. Nothing really comes to mind as we observe a respectful silence, so we head off southward again. Unexpectedly, we fall into a massive hole in the ground and find ourselves in an underground passage full of enemies. We head off to the right and come to an impassably high jump and decide to try out our new magic spell. And as a fairy, we fly up to the ledge and into the passage beyond, which apparently takes us underneath a small part of the lake to a lonely island where sits the 4th palace. We enter in to see what treasures we can find and to place the crystal within the totem. As with the dungeons before us, this one swarms with enemies and is much larger than either of the palaces before, or I should say any of the palaces before. Additionally, there are even more enemies and fearsome pain-in-the-ass upgrades to existing ones. Blue Stalfos use downward thrusts to deal increased damage and move more erratically. Some Doom Knockers throw maces at us that blow right past our defenses, and worst of all, the blue Iron Knuckles lurk deep within the dungeon. They throw damaging blades at blinding speeds and keep a safe distance from our sword, while still annoyingly blocking basically every attack in our arsenal. These things are a pure menace, and we rage as we beat our heads against these armored foes over and over again. But one good thing, we find a raft in this palace, which can safely see us across the body of water to eastern Hyrule. Taking the raft, we head to finish this painful palace and place the crystal in the totem. In the bottom reaches of the palace, it's as if all of our worst fears become manifest as a blue armored Iron Knuckle comes charging at us on an armored steed. Using our downward thrust a few times, we dehorse the menace, who then proceeds to toss swords at us as if he were getting paid by the blade. After a grueling battle, this foe falls like all those before it and explodes in a glorious fashion. Rejoicing on its corpse, we go place the crystal in the totem and head back to Mido to heal up and continue on our quest. From Mido, we launch the raft and enter the eastern part of Hyrule. We are immediately confronted by some blue Tektites, which are completely immune to everything in our arsenal, so we hightail it to the nearest town. In Nabooru, we learn the fire spell from a very thirsty woman's uncle, which allows our sword to shoot fire beams and damage those Tektites and some other enemies at longer ranges. We head north to the caves and pass through them to the northern part of this area, and head east to find the fabled maze, which is said to contain the 5th palace. While wandering this maze, we find another container that increases our total magic, and we also find a small child who is lost and says that he is from Darunia Town in the mountains. Taking this small child, we immediately leave the maze and take the boy home, fighting off plenty of nasty monsters along the way. And thanks, the boy's father teaches us a new magic spell that increases the potency of our shield to reflect strong attacks and even reflect magic back on the caster. Also in Darunia Town, we find another Hylian knight who teaches us the upward thrust, which allows us to hit enemies from below with our blade. We take these new spells and abilities and head back to the maze to find the dungeon. After a long search and many battles, we enter the 5th palace at the end of the maze. And as before, we find it full of challenging foes, including the magic-wielding Wizrobes from our previous journey. With our own magic spells, we fortify our shield and reflect this hostile magic back at our attackers to vanquish them. This palace also has vast chasms that we must traverse and even voluntarily fall down in order to find all the keys and the treasure items within. In the depths of the palace, we find some magical boots which allow us to walk on water and lava. After finding the boots, we head on back to continue the exploration of the palace to find the boss and place the crystal within the totem. Eventually, after much trial and error and dozens of enemies, we come to the boss room, where we are confronted by a massive red-robed Wizrobe. This boss quickly teleports all around the arena, tossing spells along the ground quicker than we can react at many times. This boss, like the minor Wizrobes before it, can only be damaged by reflecting its own magic back at it. By sitting in a corner of the arena, we just sit back, relax, and let the boss kill itself. And just like all the others, it explodes in a blaze of glory. We head on to place the crystal in the totem and exit the dungeon. And as the dungeon turns to stone behind us, we set our sights towards the largely unexplored eastern segment of Hyrule to find the last of the palaces and head towards the Valley of Death to claim the Triforce.
This has been the plot recap as read by Matt. Let's go ahead and get into part 2, which is our takes, where we talk about this section of the game and how it made us feel. Later, we'll get into Z-targeting, which I'm sure will feature Matt kind of going on about what is clearly his favorite character in this entire game, which is the blue iron knuckle. You brought a very specific energy to this plot recap, Matt, and I appreciated that about it.
Well, I try to bring specific energy to all of them to just let you know how I feel about it, but this so more than any other. And like I said, my feelings have not mellowed.
Yeah.
As you and Max's feelings have, as you said at the beginning, you've kind of tempered it out, mellowed it out. Nope, not for me.
Cool. Well,
I mean, to be fair to you, the only reason mine have mellowed out is because I'm playing a hacked version of the game. That's easy.
See, I kind of wish I had that option, but also for the integrity of the pod, I don't feel like I could do that. So, is what it is.
I appreciate that you hold your integrity in such high importance, Matt. That's we appreciate your sacrifice is what I'm trying to say here. Well, I mean, I feel like it would be wrong to start with anybody else in part 2 other than Matt, who clearly has got opinions and feelings. So, Matt, why don't you kick us off? How did you feel about this section of the game?
Well, in a surprise twist, I actually liked most of this section. Like, the exploration of Mido Town, getting the downward thrust, getting the fairy spell, which is very weird. That's just it's a weird one, but whatever. The graveyard section was kind of annoying just because there were so many random encounters that felt like they spawned right on top of you and you didn't really have an opportunity to avoid. The Tomb of the King was kind of neat. I wish it actually did something and gave you something. That would have been kind of cool. Like even just a red magic potion or something. Falling down that surprise hole was neat, and having that be the way to get to the Island Palace. I'm not going to talk about the Island Palace here. Obviously, my plot recap speaks for itself, but Island Palace was a thing. Then I think going to Eastern Hyrule was really cool. I really liked that. It felt like an expansion on the segment in Legend of Zelda where you went to the island. I really either one of the islands, either the island in the middle of the lake or the island where the old man gave you another piece of heart. Both of those were pretty cool exploration pieces. This is just taking that to a whole new level of opening up a whole other continent, more or less. I don't know if it's a continent, a peninsula. I don't really know the geography super well, but I really liked that. Taking taking the set piece and moving it completely. I thought that was a really cool additional amount of exploration that could be done. Like, I feel like I have a whole nother segment of map to explore because I do.
And I
really like that.
Yeah, I just want to say something about the geography of this real quick, because one thing that I've actually kind of appreciated about most of the Zelda games that we played so far where you're actually playing in Hyrule is that even though there's some wild inconsistencies in terms of like the locations of recurring places, for instance, the Temple of Time, which apparently just kind of like moseys wherever it wants to be from game to game. But a lot of the games do have some interesting consistency in terms of like the layout of the map, right? To a greater or lesser extent.
Death Mountain is normally like the northeastern section. Zora's Domain is kind of around there.
Sure.
The desert's on the southwest. Like, yeah, it kind of flows.
Lake Hylia
right?
typically is in the southeast, and even as far as like the crazy thing where if you like if you overlay a map of A Link to the Past Hyrule over Breath of the Wild's Hyrule, they're actually like weirdly consistent with each other. You know, that is something that is. It's a fun little Easter egg that is, it's fun to pick apart as you go into a new Zelda game from a previous one. But I think that the geography of Hyrule in Zelda 2 is definitely, it's odd. You know, it's definitely weird. I think this is for the heavy lore nerds who really try to find the consistencies and the through lines between all of these things. I'm willing to bet that this game probably gives them more of a headache than any of the others, just because aside from the cool bit where the Zelda 1 overworld map is able to be found in this game, there's just nothing else here that's like, oh yeah, it's kind of here in this other game and all that sort of thing. It's just, nope, it's a weird map.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. But in the way that it is weird and unique, I think that's what makes me like it a little bit more, and kind of a point of enjoyment in this game that I have kind of been missing, which is some newness and some more exploration added into it. Like it was needed, in my opinion, like a breath of fresh air.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that. And I enjoyed the maze a lot. I liked the addition of a surprise encounter maze, and I actually completed the maze on the first try without even really looking at the whole map. Like, I wasn't looking at a map of the maze online or anything. I was just kind of trying to follow with my eyes where to go, and was able to complete that. And that was kind of a fun challenge.
Well, and that's actually one of the things that I think is kind of interesting, is that especially right after having played Breath of the Wild, where we've got the labyrinths, and we thought that those were so fun to explore, and then we have a labyrinth island in Adventure of Link. Yeah. So, that's
I like
neat.
that.
Yeah.
And visiting 2 new towns was fun. And as I explore each of the towns, I enjoy that they have different styles, right? Like the architecture in each one is a little bit different, and the number of people and the number of town segments. Like, I think there's one town that has 3 segments, or some of them have 2, and the buildings look different. So I'm enjoying that a lot, to see just the minor differences that they're able to make within the towns to make them feel distinct.
Yeah. So
I'm enjoying that a lot. It gives it a sense of place that I think this game lacks in a lot of other ways, and I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I get you. So I have a few points I want to bring up. Number one, just talking about the aesthetic that you were mentioning, Matt, of finding new towns and NPCs and, meeting new people and all that. Yes, I do appreciate that, especially in contrast to Zelda 1, which had none of that. I'm continuing to enjoy the character of these spaces, right? Like the little personalities that they tried to give to them. It's still pretty rudimentary, but an effort was made, and I do appreciate that. I think the thing that I'm sort of finding aesthetically about this game, the further that we get into it, is that the art style is really just not working for me. It's not, and there's a lot of things that fall under that umbrella. I mean, the weird perspectives of doors and gates and things in towns is definitely annoying, but even more than that, I think obviously, on the NES, there's a very limited palette of colors with which to draw from whenever you're creating environments and whatnot. And that was something that Zelda 1 had to deal with as well. But I think that with the limited tools available, Zelda 1 managed to capitalize on them a little bit better and to create a world that felt more artistically interesting to me. I don't know what it is exactly, but like the textures and like swatches and the world that was kind of built here is visually bland to me.
Yeah, even the sprites are not great. Like, honestly, like they're more detailed than they were in Legend of Zelda, but yeah, I don't know. I agree that the art style isn't really doing it for me. I just appreciate that they try to differentiate towns, right? Like that's kind of all I was trying to say there, but I totally agree that I'm not loving the artistic direction.
Some of the enemy sprites, I will say, are actually quite cool, and I really enjoy. Like the Octoroks, I actually think look pretty cool. The Iron Knuckles look pretty cool. I like the
Goiras a lot.
Yeah.
I like the Gorias.
Gorias.
Yeah.
The boss designs tend to be pretty cool.
Yeah, I'm actually on the same page. The enemy designs are what stand out to me in this game, and to a lesser extent, some of the townsfolk. But like when you're going between the cave in the new land, and you're going north through that cave to get to the Maze Island area, there's this weird like 4-legged creature that shoots fireballs at you. I think it's like a Zora or something. It looks like a Zora to me. But it switches between standing on its hind legs and standing on all fours. And that thing is super cool looking.
Yeah, it looked like a Totodile.
I was thinking if we're all talking about the same thing, I thought that was a Dodongo, but I don't know. There's no telling. But regardless, the animation of it is pretty cool. But I mean, aside from that, I mean, Super Mario Brothers predates this game, and it's a side-scrolling world entirely, and it did more interesting things with its environments and textures and whatnot than this really did, and so I found that to be a source of disappointment as we kind of continue into the game. It's just artistically, I don't think a very strong effort in the canon of Zelda games, which I would be perfectly willing to excuse because of its age if The Legend of Zelda had not done it better one game previous to this. But
I also can see, like, knowing you and your preference for that specific era and style of art, like those are also the indie games that you generally enjoy more artistically as well. So like it could totally be a personal preference thing. And like, while I tend to agree with you, I also didn't like love The Legend of Zelda. Like 8-bit games and sprites and stuff like that don't really do it for me. So, I don't want to like say that it is objectively bad. I think we're saying it's subjectively, it just doesn't quite do it for us, right?
Yeah. For me, for Legend of Zelda 1, I think they did a good job for the color palette and resolution they were working with for like Link's sprite, and to a lesser extent some of the enemy sprites. The bosses were often bad. Zelda 2, it's like compared to even its contemporaries working with similar tech and palette or resolution, I think it is pretty bad looking.
I don't like Link's sprite. I think Link's sprite looks kind of ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree with that. I'm not a wild fan of it. I don't know. Yeah,
sorry, Max. I didn't mean to cut you off. I just wanted to like throw that in there.
Yeah. One thing that I thought was kind of nice about this section of the game is that, last week, Matt, we were talking a lot about, and then the week before that as well, we were talking a lot about how I was really feeling the lack of inventory, right? I was missing Link's arsenal. We don't have a boomerang. We don't have a bow. We don't have any of the, like, obviously there was no hook shot in The Legend of Zelda, but it's like, we don't have any of these things that we're kind of used to having and that are fun to play around with. All we really had was our sword and our shield, and then we had a magical means by which to heal ourselves and to add damage resistance to ourselves. But those are still both passive things for the most part, right? This week, we actually filled out our repertoire of magic spells a little bit more. We still have, I think, 1 or 2 more to go after this, but we did get the fireballs this week, which were a clear standout. They are a low-cost magical ability that are actually decently useful, at least against enemies that we find in this section of the game. I know that the fairy thing is weird. Like, thematically, it's kind of interesting. I don't really get it, but like, it is fun as far as traversal goes, and it does give us some more options there. And then the reflect spell basically gives us a mirror shield, right? And so one thing that I did think was fun in this section of the game was the filling out of Link's abilities and kind of giving us more tools to play with on a minute-to-minute basis. And what I've kind of found now is that, especially as we get into more challenging combat sections of the game, I am getting into a flow where in each combat encounter, I'm kind of trying to figure out like, okay, maybe I don't need to save all of my magic for life replenishment. Maybe it does make sense to use my high jump here, or my damage resist, or my shield reflect, or my fireballs, or whatever. And I'm definitely kind of like appreciating all of those different options and feeling like I found use cases for all of them several times this week, which is really nice, actually. I still think it's unfortunate that it's all tied to this magic meter situation, right? That's the big limiting factor, and that sort of makes it a little bit a little inherently less fun to possess some of these things, because in other Zelda games, right, they're pretty much infinite use. But still, credit where credit is due. Those abilities are useful, and I did lean on them a lot this week.
As I've played more, so for a while I thought a lot of the spells were, I couldn't really imagine how I was going to get a lot of use out of them. Or how I could ever afford to waste magic on them. Right? But I've been finding myself more and more often seeing a situation and realizing like, oh, if I use this spell like jump, for instance, to approach this combat differently, I can actually avoid taking more damage than it would be than I could heal with the same amount of magic.
Yeah,
like that kind of calculus is going through my head a lot.
Yeah, I found myself doing the same thing. I think that while I really like the addition of the fire spell, there are so many enemies that are immune to ranged attacks, specifically Iron Knuckles, and even like Stalfos, I think. You can't damage them with the sword beam or the fireball. And like trying to approach that combat, like going back to what we've been talking about which is the famine economy of like, I have to constantly think about, how do I make sure that I have enough magic to go into an area so that I can do what is required. Like there was multiple times in the second dungeon that we played this week where I didn't have enough magic to activate my jump spell to go get one of the keys, or to activate reflect spell the first time I fought the boss, because I just didn't have enough magic going into the fight. And so like I had to die so that I could refill my health and magic. And luckily I had an extra life and didn't get a game over. And there was just no way around that. Like I couldn't leave the dungeon, go farm some magic and come back. I'd have to fight everything all over again. Like I wouldn't have to get the keys, but I have to fight everything and utilize much of the same amount of magic to get back to it. So stuff like that really is becoming more and more of a frustration, even as I continue leveling up. And like it's supposed to reduce the amount of magic it takes to do spells, but healing still costs 50, and shield reflect spell costs 36 or 32 or whatever. And the famine economy is really pushing this into a place that is very hard to be strategic about approaching combat in a different way outside of like, I just can't use magic and I have to try to beat this boss without losing any health and also not using magic or this enemy. And like, that's becoming very frustrating.
Well, and that's one of the cardinal sins of this whole system. We'll get to it when we talk about the bosses and the dungeons, but there are definitely areas in this section of the game where if you don't have enough magic to cast a particular spell, then you're SOL. Like you just can't do it. And I think that is a failing of the system on a design level. But we'll get into that more a little bit later. Max, do you have any general thoughts about this section of the game before we talk more specifically about dungeons and things like that?
I do. So there's two or three kind of standout moments in this section of the game for me. And one of them I've already talked about, which was when I ran into the blue iron knuckle and entirely quit my game and started a whole new save file on a different system.
And that was the first blue iron knuckle, just to clarify.
Yep. No, I actually got to it. I died to it once and I was already like really kind of frustrated. So I was just like, forget this, and threw down the game and didn't play for 24 hours. So that was a memorable moment in a very bad way. In the past, I have also never gotten past the third dungeon, the Island Palace. That's where I've fallen off this game in my past attempts to play it. The second one for me was getting the downward swing, which is a total game changer to the combat in this game. Prior to getting that ability, you generally need to approach sword combat in either a very risky fashion or a very passive fashion. You either need to kind of like wait for the enemy to get to you and time your sword swing so that it hits them and knocks them back before they hit you. Or you need to do a leaping attack. And that's generally pretty risky. Or a run and stop. And the second, as soon as you get the downward swing, suddenly you have a way to attack unapproached enemies that is more versatile, and you can approach a bunch of enemies, don't attack upwards, so you can approach from an area that they're not attacking from. And it just really opens up your options and changes how you look at most combat situations. Assuming it's an enemy that can be damaged with the downward swing.
Which Iron Knuckles cannot be, because of course they can't.
However, most can, and that is important to mention. So yeah, basically, one thing that I definitely felt when using the downward thrust for the first time was that Shovel Knight vibes are definitely intensifying. This is a core piece of the Shovel Knight kit, and so yeah, the connection between that game and this game continued to intensify for me. But the other one was that Josh was totally right. Every single time I use the downward thrust, I feel like I'm just playing Link in Super Smash Brothers. Like,
yeah,
that is like totally Super Smash Brothers Link move number one. So yeah, it felt familiar in that way, but
it's Adventure of Link's most lasting impact on the series. It's the downward thrust.
Yeah,
I mean, the moveset for Link in Smash Brothers is straight out of Adventure of Link in a lot of ways. The upward thrust and the downward thrust, and the reflect spell even in some ways, because Smash Bros has the deflect capability. Yeah, it's pretty great.
It's interesting. I actually see a lot of ways that are kind of incidental that Adventure of Link influenced the series, but it's all like little details that seem like they came back later, but whereas like the core of the game, how it all works, like was totally discarded.
Yeah.
So that's kind of an interesting thing I'm noticing as I play through. Maybe I'll talk about that more in the recap episode.
Yeah. So anyway, sorry to derail you, but yeah, just wanted to talk about the downward thrust for a second.
The upward thrust seems comparatively less useful. I haven't found a use for it yet, actually.
Other than breaking blocks, yeah.
There are some Firefly enemies, Dragonfly enemies that I found in this section of the game that I was able to use it to defeat them, and I don't know. I guess I'm glad that I have it. I would also say that I wasn't using it. Yeah, I was not using it nearly as much as the downward.
The third kind of major moment for me was jumping on that raft, going to Hyrule 2. Or I don't actually know what they call this second major continent, but Adventure of Link does this very interesting thing to me where where Zelda 1 was intimate, personal, small, Zelda 2 is like, we're going to do the opposite of that. We're going to give you a world. We will show you the world. And I got into Zelda fandom by like finding Zelda fan sites in like, I don't know, 1998-ish. And I was pretty young, but so I was like reading all the fan fiction, and I had not played almost any Zelda games at that point, but knowing what I know now, looking back, Adventure of Link like really energized the Zelda fandom with just an incredible amount of like stuff for their imaginations to latch onto. All the fan fiction was about North Castle or the Zelda cartoon, which referenced stuff from Adventure of Link a lot, or it kind of portrayed Hyrule as this thriving place that had a functioning government and villages and people and things going on in it that you just really didn't get from Zelda 1. And this moment where you go to the second continent really just drives that home. You're like, oh, I am exploring a large world in a way that other Zelda games, even since then, don't really do. So I don't know. That's interesting. Like, I think a lot of things about this game weren't successful, but a lot of things it did were like experimental and made a big impression on people, especially at the time.
Yeah. Well, I think, Matt and I even mentioned in our intro episode for this game that we felt like one of the biggest wins of the game, overall, was that the expansion of the lore and the fiction of this world is actually very interesting. And there are a lot of things that are kind of established in this game that become fictional mainstays of the Zelda universe for the remainder of its existence, and for that reason alone, it's interesting, and I appreciate it because The Legend of Zelda, I think we had talked about while we were playing through that game that it just so many of the things that we rely on in these games were present. We had a Zelda, we had a Ganon, we had an Impa, and we had a Hyrule, but they were all sketches of themselves, basically. It was a snapshot of what it could be. And what this game is kind of doing is expanding that story. And I appreciate it very much for that, if for nothing else.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, cool. I think that probably is going to suffice for part 2, because I know that at least I have got some things to say about the dungeons specifically. So let's go ahead and get into part 3, which is the dungeon map, where we analyze this week's dungeon from mechanics to music and more. Of course, in season 6 of Sacred Realms Pod, we are, for the most part, getting 2 dungeons per episode. We're doing that again this week. So we're going to talk about Dungeon 3, which is the Island Palace, and then Dungeon 4, which is the which is the Maze Island Palace. So let's go ahead and start with Dungeon 3. This is the dungeon where we, as has been previously noted, we encounter our first blue iron knuckle. This dungeon is definitely not as large as Medoro Palace before it, and also not as large as Maze Island Palace after it. But definitely features a difficulty spike. I don't think there's any denying that. Max, how did you feel about this one?
So you've heard the most important bit of my feedback already, but other stuff.
Rage quit.
So one thing I've noticed about Adventure of Link is its dungeons do have much more personality than Zelda 1's dungeons.
Like they just actually, in terms of like encounter design?
In terms of like, are they memorable as their own place? Do they blur together in my mind as much? And the answer is no, they don't blur together as much. And yes, they are more memorable individually. I actually have memories that I'm like, oh yeah, that was a memory from this dungeon or that dungeon, instead of, I don't remember what dungeon that was, which is how I felt about Zelda 1. But so what's with Island Palace, it's interesting because it's the first dungeon that really makes use of these destructible tiles. Right?
Yes.
Like that's a major theme in this dungeon. It's all over this dungeon. And they play with it. They have some rooms where they're like, oh, you need to break these things in order to give yourself footsteps in order to get places. And oh, if you broke the wrong one, you let out a red iron knuckle that was hiding in a cage, and now you need to kill it. Whoops. So they find these ways to play with it. And the most memorable one for me is that one room where you need to go in and get a key, and it has those gargoyle heads. I don't know their name.
Gargoyle heads that'll do.
Yeah, they're like the floating heads that shoot fireballs, and they have a very predictable pattern where they shoot, go up 2 spaces, shoot, go down 2 spaces. And I was trapped in the, buried in all these destructible cubes with the key, unable to get out because I was out of mana, and I just had to like really, really memorize the rhythm of this pattern in order to survive escaping this area. When I restarted the game and played this again, I instead used the shield spell and the jump spell to get out of there. But that was a very memorable moment to me. So that's the sort of stuff that sticks out to me in this dungeon is this use of destructible stones.
Yeah. So I want to touch on that for a minute, because that was one of my favorite things about this week, and about both of these dungeons, really. The second dungeon we're going to talk about doesn't use it as much. It's mainly happening here, but it still has a little bit. But the destructible blocks I found to be a very fun and interesting obstacle. You really do have to have an awareness of place, especially in that room that you're talking about where you have those infinitely spawning gargoyle heads, and you basically have to, like, you're given hundreds of these destructible blocks, and they're stacked like 4 or 5 high, and whatever stairs or escape route you can make out of that, it's totally up to you to figure out how to do it. And I thought that was frantic in a fun way. I actually really did enjoy that. It was still occasionally frustrating. Like I still took I still took quite a lot of hits, while trying to figure out how to do this. And some of that was because I hadn't quite gotten the rhythm of that enemy movement down yet that you were talking about. And then once you kind of learn how that works, it's a lot easier to figure out. Of course, there's only so far that goes once you have like 3 of them coming at you from both sides, right? But like there is a learning curve to figuring out how to deal with them. But I did think that in terms of like what I consider to be a dungeon puzzle, I think that this qualifies, really. I think that later games certainly will do very different things in terms of trying to give you puzzles in a room or whatever. But I think that on the terms that this game has established of like this side-scrolling layout to dungeons, I do think that this does qualify as a puzzle, and it really causes you to think, and I appreciated it for that reason.
Yeah, I would say I enjoyed this as well the first time that it happened. The other like 3 or 4 times that it happened, I was like, okay, we get it. You figured out how to make this happen. Yeah, a little overkill on the reuse of that puzzle, I think.
The first time it happened, it was brutal. The second time it happened, I felt smart when I thought of a way to avoid it. And the third time, it was like old hat. I kind of didn't really think about it. I was just in and out.
So I ended up using one of these rooms actually as a farming spot because, again, I think Josh mentioned this last week on that episode, but the way that experience works in this game is that once you place a crystal at the end of a dungeon, it auto completes whatever level you're currently working on. So if you're working towards a 2000 XP level up and you have 1750 experience when you beat the boss, when you go place the crystal, it's going to auto complete, whatever 250 that you have left to go, which is neat. But also, if you are on like 0001 experience and you beat the boss, and then you go place the crystal, then you just got, 1,999 experience points for completely free. So the strategy is really to, if you're anywhere close to a level up, try to go grind that out and then go beat the boss. The nice thing about these floating gargoyle heads is that, like I said, they spawn infinitely. They're one-hit kills, and they get you 5 experience per kill. And they have a very predictable movement pattern once you kind of like learn what it is. So I was definitely able to use 1 or 2 of these rooms as farming spots to kind of like, it's like, I could really use 200 XP real quick.
Just make sure you're reliably dodging everything or blocking everything, because they drain your XP when they hit you.
Yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Do they take damage from fireball spell? Because I didn't test that.
I didn't try.
Okay.
Yeah. I would assume not. That seems like it would be too easy, but I don't know. Especially because
the real question is, does reflect work on their projectiles? I also didn't try that.
Yeah.
Ooh, that's a good question.
But it would be OP.
Yeah, I should Google that and see how either of those things work, because, of course, the way that magic works in this game is that once you cast a spell in a room, it's like infinite for the entire time that you're in that room. Like once you pass into another room, the spell is broken and you have to cast it again. But if you were to cast fireballs in one of these rooms and just farm these dudes forever, you could do that. You would never run out of fireballs. So yeah, that would be something to look into for sure. But yeah, so that's definitely a fun strategy that I found in this dungeon. I want to talk about the blue iron knuckles real quick, because seriously, like if we had a jar for this episode, then we would already be rich. We've talked about those guys a ton. Obviously, they're very difficult. They're a huge ramp up in difficulty over the regular iron knuckles that we've already fought. What I want to say about these guys is that I don't think that as an enemy type, they're actually as hard as we're saying that they are. Here's the problem. Basically, every time you fight one of these guys, you're doing it in like a tunnel or in some little cranny, and you just have got like no space to move. For that reason, I actually enjoyed the boss a little bit more. Like I thought I was like, when I got to the boss room for Island Palace and I saw that it was a blue iron knuckle, I just about tore my hair out, and I was like, this seriously, why are you doing this to me? But then, like, you know, once I actually started that fight, and once I realized that when you have some room to maneuver and to create space between yourself and the blue iron knuckle, it's more interesting of an experience. But every single other place that it happens in this dungeon, it's just like you're fighting this thing in a dark alley somewhere, basically, and it's just the worst.
You stumble out of the bar, walking towards your car. What do you see?
Blue iron knuckles are to take all your money.
Oh man!
Oh boy!
But I mean, am I wrong though?
I think you're wrong. Yes.
Cool.
Wait, what? I don't think you're wrong. You do usually fight them in alleys.
Oh no, you do usually fight them in alleys, but I think even outside of that, they're incredibly frustrating because they have an infinite ranged attack and they constantly back up from you. And unless you can get them to a point where they can't back up anymore, you can't even get within range to hit them. So like that's why the boss was a little bit easier, because he didn't have anywhere to go. So you could kind of maneuver him into a position where you could actually do damage, where you don't have that option most of the other time, whether you're in a big room or not.
Yeah. So one of the downsides potentially of the way I was playing up until this point, which was that I was kind of using save states and rewinding a lot because I didn't want to have to lose all my lives and get back to where I was that I was not mastering the combat with easier iron knuckles, right? Like oftentimes when a game presents you with this hard wall, it's a hard enemy, you have to beat it to proceed. You kind of have no choice but to get skilled enough to beat it.
Got to get good.
And I was bypassing. Yeah, you have to get good. And I wasn't getting good because I was instead save stating my way through. I was only halfway getting good. So I think by the time I got to this blue iron knuckle, I didn't have my skills built up to the point that I would have had if I had been playing totally legit. other than the fact that if I'd been playing totally legit, I would have rage quit before I got here. So, there's that part. But so I think maybe all of us, but definitely me, I was getting to this enemy just totally unequipped with the skills to beat it. So I tried it a few times. It's attacking faster with slower or less time to see its tells. It's backing up from my attacks instead of walking into them. And it just felt like this impossible thing. Like I was like, oh, there's no way I'm going to beat this unless I rewind after every hit I take. So I didn't even get to the point really where I was noticing that it was backing up more than other Iron Knuckles. Although now that you pointed out, you're right. It totally was.
I think that it's interesting when we talk about the combat learning curve of how to fight some of these enemies, because obviously I had a hell of a time with regular Iron Knuckles in the last few episodes, and I got to the point where this week a red Iron Knuckle wasn't something that really bothered me too much. Like I've gotten to the point where I'm good enough at the jump stab thing to where 75% of the time I can take these dudes out before they hit me even once, and I'm never having to rewind against one unless I'm like in permadeath mode, right? Where one hit from anything will do me in. And that does happen sometimes. And they still manage to land a hit every now and again. But like for the most part, I am kind of like learning how to tackle these guys. The trouble is that, again, the blue Iron Knuckles, you really can't even rely on that for the most part. I'm not ashamed to say that in every blue Iron Knuckle encounter that I came up against this week, which I don't know, what do you think, Matt? They're like 4 or 5, something like that?
Something like that, yeah.
Yeah, between both dungeons. I probably rewound my game 50 to 75 times between all of those encounters, like just a ton. And I'm not ashamed to say that. Like, I'm sure that there are people who can clear them flawlessly. That's just not the way that I'm playing this game. Like, I am relying on the rewind function to a pretty incredible degree, honestly. Like, and I still don't feel bad about that. Like, I'm not going to feel guilty about that. I'm still experiencing the game. I mean, is it similar for you, Matt?
Yeah, I really do think that is true because, like, as much as I've been trying to master the jump and hit them in the head with red Dark Knights, blue Dark Knights Iron Knuckles.
I keep wanting to call them Dark Knuckles too. Yeah.
Okay, I'm glad it's not just me. Thank you. Blue Iron Knuckles are immune to that because if you jump to stab them in the head, they just throw a sword and hit you anyway. So that doesn't work for this enemy anymore. So like all of the skill that you've been building up to fight Iron Knuckles is now totally useless. You have to actually push them forward and block their stuff by doing the up and then crouching up, out, crouch up, crouch up, crouch, you have to do the whole teabagging mechanic to get close enough to them without taking too much damage. So they basically, to somewhat counter your point there, Max, about not having the skill, which I do agree. I definitely don't have the skill that I would have if I were trying to play this the normal way. But they are a total flip of the more established way to kill Iron Knuckles that we've had previously. They're just different.
Yeah, and
that's quite true.
And in fairness, there is a pattern here, right? Like, it is definitely possible to block most of these knives, or at least a good amount of them, right? But you can only keep that up for so long, and each one that hits you does such an incredible amount of damage that's like, yeah, I don't get how people beat this game when rewinding and save states weren't a thing. That sounds miserable to me. And I'm very, very happy that I'm playing it in such a way that allows me to circumvent, a lot of the permanently, like warp back to North Castle and lose your experience and all those things. Because that sounds like a nightmare.
You know what ability I hope I find a knight who can teach me in a town somewhere? the ability for Link to duck his face behind his shield.
God, right?
He's crouching. I know that that's not a thing.
Well, it's just so tough because I do take a lot of hits as well, where I'm like, I see something coming at me and I duck and I'm like, oh, I'm good. But it's like, nope. There's 2 planes of movement or of like projectile movement here. There's your head and then there's your knees, and it's one of those. And regardless of how many times you think you're safe by crouching, you know, it's sorry, like it's not going to go over your head. Yeah. We've already talked about the boss. It's a blue iron knuckle on a steed. I mean, yeah. What else is there to say? The mounted part of this fight is super easy. Just use your downward thrust. You kill the horse, or was it a horse? Or it looked like he had like a hover bike in the shape of a horse.
It's like a hover motorcycle. You know, it's when you get your motorcycle in Breath of the Wild 2, these are the biker gangs you're going to fight.
It's like what it looked like a Zelda version of like a quarter operated, like, you know, horsey out in front of a grocery store, right? Like he's just riding around on one of those. So, yeah. So we took care of that guy. And after you kill the steed, it's just a regular blue iron knuckle. So not too much else to say there. The item that we get in this dungeon is the raft. Of course, the raft allows us to move on a predetermined path between 2 points. After we acquire this item, we are able to move to another continent. And of course, with another continent comes another dungeon. So let's go ahead and start talking about that one. That is Maze Island Palace, which is much different than Island Palace. If nothing else, it's a larger dungeon. There's a lot more of it to discover here. This dungeon, I enjoyed quite a bit more than the one before it. I appreciate how it's kind of like bifurcated into 2 distinct areas that are not connected to each other. I think that it's so fun because we know that in order to count a dungeon as having been cleared, you have to get both the main item that's in it and also you have to place the crystal in the statue. What this dungeon has done is it put the crystal, it put the statue in one half and it put the item in another half, and you have to kind of conquer them separately. And I appreciate that because it really does allow for some more exploration than we've had from dungeons in this game so far. The other thing that this does for the first time is that it allows you to fall into pits as a means from getting from one room to another, which I did not pick up on immediately because this game is really fond of its insta-death, like lava or water areas.
It does love the insta-death. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah. But at the same time, you know, like I'm not going to sit here and say like, "Ooh, I should have realized that you could jump into this pit and get to the room below."
Yeah, there's no way you could have possibly known.
No,
that.
Absolutely no way. However, that being said, this is a very Link's Awakening thing that it does here. Like I got some Eagles Tower vibes doing all this.
Yeah, I appreciated the pit of, you know, the bottomless pit as a means of transportation. It felt, to use another game, it felt kind of Shadow Temple-y, and I enjoyed that. I accidentally discovered it by not having my jump spell activated and missing the first jump and then falling all the way down to the bottom. And I was like, oh, cool. I guess I should probably go from here and just kind of explore. So I enjoyed Maze Palace a lot more for that reason alone, of just, like you said, Lyndon, having them separated drives you to an exploration that has kind of been missing. And I really enjoyed it. I liked going all around and being my completionist self, kind of sectioning off the portions of the palace as much as I could and like exploring basically bottom up as much as possible. I had a good time with it. There were less blue iron knuckles, which was great. I don't have as much of a hard time with the doom knockers, which is what those mace thrower guys are called. So every time I would see one of those, especially now that I have the downward thrust, was like, cool, get to an easy 150 experience or whatever it is off these guys. And sometimes they'll even drop some magic. Yeah, I like those guys. So yeah, I liked this dungeon quite a bit more, or palace or whatever it's called, than Island Palace.
Did you find that to be the case as well, Max?
Yeah, this is my favorite dungeon so far in this game. I should admit that may be colored by the fact this is the first one that I experienced 100% in easy mode. But I find the Doom Throwers are fun to fight. The Wizrobes are also fun to fight because it's really satisfying to reflect their attacks back at them. As long as you have the magic for it, of course. There aren't as many Iron Knuckles, which I hate to fight. And then there's the boss, which I guess I can talk about later when we're at the boss.
Yeah. Yeah, no. I agree with you about the Wizrobes, definitely. I love that that feeling of when you manage to connect their shot back to them, and then you see that like 100 or is it 75 or 100 experience that you get from killing one of those. It's a big number regardless, and it's always very satisfying whenever you make that happen.
Especially because it's not that hard. Like,
no, yeah.
You killed yourself. It's like, why you stop hitting yourself? Stop hitting yourself. Stop hitting yourself.
No, it's not difficult at all, and it's always a lot of fun. Yeah, I definitely think going back to your point about the magic economy again, Max. You said like this is something that's easy to do if you have the magic for it. It's got me thinking that so between jump and shield, enhance and reflect and fireballs and all these other things, these are all decently cheap things to do. I think that the only reason that magic feels like it's at such a premium is because the restore health bit is so wildly expensive and
you feel like you have to save for it.
Yeah. But regardless of that, I did not and granted, I allowed myself to take a game over between dungeons so that I was refilled on lives. So I never really felt necessarily like I was as pressured to save all of my magic for healing as I probably could have been. The other thing that's a fun trick to use that I definitely did in this dungeon, especially because after you kind of like come back from the eastern half where you get the boots and then you go to the western half to do the boss and the crystal and all that, you pass right by the entrance to the dungeon. And all you have to do is leave the dungeon and come back in. And every single time you do that, you can hit the Iron Knuckle statue at the beginning to get a full magic top off. So,
that respawns.
yes, it does.
It does?
Every time?
Yep.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well, I wish I had known that.
It was like that last week with one of the other dungeons as well. All you have to do is leave the dungeon, come back in, hit the statue again, you get a full magic top off. So if you're really,
but all the enemies respawn too, don't they?
Well, yeah, but you're not going back to that first half of the dungeon. Like, there's no reason to go back there.
Oh, yeah, that's
because
true.
You already, assuming you got the boots and all the keys, then you shouldn't have to go clear any enemies that you've already beaten because you're just going to be going forward into the second half where you beat the boss. So,
yeah, that's a good call. Although I do want to say, in the dungeon last week, I saw a note on zeldadungeon.net that intro statue, and it did it for me last week, was it can spawn either a full magic potion or a red iron knuckle for you to fight. Like, it's kind of a random chance, one or the other. So you can beat yourself up on that, just by the way.
Still something to keep in mind. Like, if you really need some health, then yeah, just exit the dungeon and re-enter and you can try and farm that statue. But anyway, yeah, so the Wizrobes are a very fun enemy. I thought this dungeon for me, what it kind of really did is it made me think about, do I like the way that dungeons are done in this game as a concept? Like, do I think that there is room for the side-scrolling Zelda dungeon to be a fun thing? And I think that the answer that I come away with is yes. I think that there is a kernel of an idea here that expanded in a more modern way could actually be a very fun iteration on dungeons in a Zelda game. And I was surprised to find that.
You first, Max.
When I play this game, it reminds me of playing Kid Icarus on my original Game Boy as a kid. Like, it's this just something about the way it's side scrolling, it's platform, it's kind of this weird jumping physics where you jump really high but not very far. You see these locked doors that are kind of these flimsy little weird doors thrown in place, and they have a lot of stuff that's like kind of just totally unexplained and doesn't have any cause in the environment, like bubbles flying upwards in some overland places, and monsters flying around with like cut off necks, like where it's like the pixel art just ends. Like it feels very, very much like other platforming kind of exploration games at the time. But the thing is, one of the things that happened with that kind of game is they all went into Metroidvania as a genre. Like Metroidvania genre is this with puzzles and navigation, right? So this could easily expand into kind of Metroidvania-esque space, which indies explore all the time, and Metroid does. And that's what a Zelda does. You could just have a Zelda dungeons that are straight up Metroid environments. Bam. That's a Zelda dungeon.
Yeah,
what do you think, Matt?
I totally agree, Max. And I was going to say kind of the same thing with the comparison to Metroid is like, I think a game that does side-scrolling dungeon diving well is Metroid Dread. And I think that if there was a way, and I'm not, intelligent or creative enough to do it, but if there was a way to take a Metroid-esque side-scrolly game and consolidate that to like a Zelda, but only within the dungeons, I would be really fun. Like I would really enjoy that. I don't know what technical aspect you would have to have a different overworld with a side scroll dungeon outside of what Adventure of Link is currently doing, which I don't necessarily love. But like if you could keep it in the third person view of like Ocarina of Time when you're out in Hyrule Field, and then as soon as you enter the dungeon, it kind of turns into that side scrolly Metroid-esque. I think there's something there. I don't know how execution wise that would work, or how that would be, sustainable from a technology standpoint, or even how it would feel in practice. But like just as a concept, it's interesting because I don't hate the way that specifically Dungeon 5 I really enjoyed. Like Dungeon 4 I did not like because of the combat of the blue iron knuckles, and like that's its own thing. But as far as going through each of these palaces has genuinely been a pretty enjoyable experience. And so I will say that the palaces are kind of a high point for me in the grand scheme of Adventure of Link right now.
Story time, by the way, if you don't mind me taking a 3-minute aside here.
Go for it.
I love Max story time. I love Max story time.
So there are some interviews where you've heard me talk about Yoshiaki Koizumi before. He was the co-director of Majora's Mask, co-inventor of Z-targeting, the writer for Link's Awakening and Link to the Past manual. And he and Miyamoto, with, as far as I know, just the two of them, at one point on the SNES, were prototyping a Zelda 2-esque Zelda game that had side-scrolling combat. That didn't see the light of day, obviously. And I mean, they were like experimenting it with 3D. It was like polygons because the SNES briefly had the FX chip and the ability to do 3D. So they were experimenting with Adventure of Link 2 for the SNES. And later, when they were making Ocarina of Time, which was also heavily featured Koizumi and Miyamoto, Koizumi, there was a plan briefly for Ocarina of Time to be first person, and combat would go to a different screen and do side-scrolling combat, like Adventure of Link. So that was almost the thing, Matt. What you just described, also how Miyamoto approached this problem at one point.
That's an interesting concept. Yeah. First person in melee combat games is always a little interesting.
It would have been first person until you got to combat in that plan. And then it would have been side scrolling like this game is.
I definitely think that there's a very interesting route that the Zelda series could have taken, especially given that from my understanding, this game was not critically panned in any major way. That's not the impression that I get, right?
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
I mean,
I'll talk about it more in the other episode, but it was a critical success and a sales success.
Yeah.
People loved it.
And so in some ways it's astounding to me that we actually kind of bounced back into A Link to the Past from this game. But anyway, we'll have that conversation more a little bit later. Real quick, I do want to talk about the boss of this dungeon because I think that Master Wizrobe is a total pushover. I think we've had hard bosses, actually very hard bosses in this game up until this point. And this guy, as long as you know where in the arena to stand, you're golden. You're just good. You're good to go. And I don't want to say that like makes it a good boss encounter, but I did appreciate that moment of respite in like comparison to everything else that happened to us this week.
In comparison to Dungeon 4, I was happy to chill in my corner, stay crouched, cast Reflect, and just be like, oh, thank God.
You can't touch this. Karok.
Literally.
I guess his name is Karok.
Sounds about right to me. It was a rare moment of feeling completely overpowered.
Like when I first saw this boss sprite, I was like, "Oh shit, this is a scary looking boss. I am terrified of what it's going to do to me." And it's kind of this weird, almost like, it feels like a different art style than a lot of the rest of the game. Almost like it's more illustrative, converted to pixels rather than.
I get that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I'm describing that super well, but like,
no,
it's got shading.
Yeah, I gotcha. Well, because it's got like folds in the cloth and stuff. I mean, it's definitely a much more like Castlevania looking enemy than anything we fought so far.
Have you noticed that it looks exactly like the art of the evil wizard from the Legend of Zelda backstory in the Adventure of Link manual?
I actually was going to say the same thing. It is almost. I was wondering if they might have been the same character until I remembered that the evil wizard died.
Or did he?
Yeah, maybe not. I posted a link to the manual in the chat, but I'm sure you can look later or whatever. But yeah, it looks very similar to that art. So I've always thought that was kind of this cool, like, is it him? Did the king I don't know, imprison him? And oh wait, no, that's the timeline.
I was about to say that the king was dead already, unfortunately, because I had the same thought and then quelled it with, oh yeah, the king was already dead.
Well,
never mind, it can't be him.
This is October, so this is our spooky Halloween Zelda story of the week. It's like the wizard was dead, or was he?
He was resurrected and then imprisoned in Palace Number 5.
Some nights, on a clear, cold day, people still say they can hear the wizard. Or something. I'm bad at ghost stories.
You stumbled through that one.
That fell apart in a big way very quickly. I'm not proud of it. I'm going to leave it in because I feel that accountability is important for a content creator. So here it is. Witness my shame, everybody. No, yeah, I think that who's to say? But I definitely agree with you, Max, that the art style of this boss is really cool. I think that's definitely a step up in that regard over the boss from the previous dungeon, which was just reused enemy on a hover bike. So,
I don't know. I kind of liked Robo Horse. Robo Horse was cool.
Okay, all right. Well,
Well, I didn't like the boss, but I thought Robo Horse, as a singular piece of that boss, Robo Horse was cool.
Well, to each their own, and I'm not here to tell you what you should or shouldn't like, Matt. That's that is not my job, and I'm not willing to take that responsibility onto myself. Do either of you have anything else that you want to say about these dungeons before we move into the lightning round, where we cover the last 3 parts of the Sacred Realms rundown in rapid succession?
Sorry, this always happens to me. I do not have anything else.
The boots are cool. Being able to walk on lava, I like that.
What? That's what they do?
Yeah. Did you not listen to the plot recap, Lyndon? You can walk on water and on lava. It's dope.
What? So, like, you don't So the lava pits are no longer insta-kill?
I don't know if they like permanently allow you to walk or just for like a short period of time. But yeah, you can walk over water and lava, including, like, I read a section on ZeldaDungeon.net while writing the plot recap about if you do get a game over, you can easily get back to the fifth palace without traversing the whole maze just by walking across the river.
You don't have to use the raft?
No, you have to use the raft to traverse like large bodies of water, but like the small rivers that have like little... like in the maze, like, you know, there's that small section of river where you just walk over a like 5-pixel bridge.
So it's it's the ladder basically.
Yeah, more or less, except it only works on water and lava, not over bottomless pits.
Gotcha. I had no idea what these things did. I was assuming that I would figure it out next week, but cool. That's neat. I'm a fan of walking on lava. You know?
Yeah, it's like the hover boots.
Okay. Well, there you go. I have obtained knowledge. Thanks, y'all. All right, let's go ahead and move into the lightning round, in which we move through parts 4, 5, and 6 in rapid succession, because there's really not too much to talk about here, and we spent a whole lot of time talking about other things. So that's just kind of the way that we do this for these older games. Part 5, of course, is Bloopy Trails, where we talk about interesting things that diverted our attention this week. Matt, you go first. Any Bloopy Trails worth mentioning? And it is okay. Just gonna say this up front to both of y'all. It is okay if you didn't Bloopy Trail.
The only thing I have is I found another creepy Link doll on accident.
Okay. Cool.
Other than that, everything else felt like it was part of the mainline quest, like getting the downward thrust, the upward thrust, and all the spells. Like, you have to do that to complete the section. So I don't feel like those are Bloopy Trails anymore.
Agreed. How about yourself, Max?
I guess most of what I did was also Golden Path. I had a fun time kind of exploring around the area around I think it's Nabooru, the first town on the new continent.
Yes, that is Nabooru.
Because I saw that river devil and I was like obsessed. I was like, this has got to be where I need to go. And I spent a long time like exploring around, trying to go over every tile on the map, looking for that secret area. Turns out that just wasn't where I should go yet. But it's kind of an interesting thing to see this like monster sprite on the overworld that we don't really see anywhere else.
Yeah, that sounds good.
So that's my Bloopy Trail.
Yeah, no, that's good. I mean, similar to you, Matt, it really mine just comes down to I found an extra thing. I tracked down the magic container that you can get in the maze. So that was nice. My magic meter is now longer, and I appreciate that. But yeah, I mean, everything else it really just honestly falls under the umbrella of things that you have to do to beat this section of the game. So with that being said, let's move on to part 5, which is Z-targeting, where we lock on to fascinating characters or enemies that we happen to cross. And let's just go in the same order. Matt, you can Z-targeting first.
Well, I'm just gonna have to take the blue iron knuckle before anybody else does, because absolutely that enemy. I hate it in every possible way. It will live in infamy even more so than Greg the Block or Igor the Block or, I don't know, pick your poison. Hate it.
I just appreciate your ability to take an expletive and give it about double the syllables that it normally should have.
You're gonna have to have an extra long bleep on that one.
I've got a few choice ones. Don't you worry, I'll figure it out.
I'm excited to hear it.
You should be. All right, the blue iron knuckle may they live in infamy. I still think maybe not quite the personality that we got from Greg the Block, who truly was a main character. He
was really a son of a bitch, but yeah. The blue iron knuckles, man.
Yeah. Max, how about yourself?
I really wanted to pick a villager, but none of them are sticking out in my mind. There's a bunch of weird one-liners with those villagers. Things that if someone actually said them to you on the street, you would be like, what's going on with this dude?
I know nothing.
I am going to pick the strange child that was kidnapped and like held in a cave and looks like a Link doll. when you at first when you see it, I found it without realizing I was going in to rescue the child. And I'm like, what is this thing I picked up?
But hey, you did a good deed. That child was being guarded by a very fearsome minotaur thing, which I actually thought was pretty cool that there was a minotaur in the maze. I don't know if that's what that enemy actually was, or if that's what it was supposed to be. But why the child was abducted, who can say, really? But
apparently in the Japanese version, the child is tied up with ropes, and you need to hit it with your sword to free it. And they changed that in the US version, so you just run into them and you pick them up.
It was just a little too violent for Western audiences.
To get rid of the child swording.
That's fair. Okay, so Max has the kidnapped child. I'm gonna go with the woman in Naburu Town who oh, no. It's in, no, she's in Maido, I think. Anyway, it's the woman who says she has a sick child and she needs the water of life in order to heal this child, right? And so you run off to a cave and you find the water of life. This seems like a pretty powerful and useful thing to just have around. You bring it to this woman who says, great, thank you. You can come into my house now. Except you go into the house and there's no sick child. There's just an old man who teaches you a spell. So I'm trying to figure out, did the sick child ever even exist? Or did this old woman just like run off somewhere and guzzle the water of life? And I don't know, maybe like dropped a few pounds or something. Like I'm just very confused because I was really looking for some catharsis here. I wanted some emotional payoff. I wanted to feel like I had done something good, but I don't know. I feel like I was had.
I mean, curing grandma's arthritis is a good deed.
Well, she could have just told me though. Like that's the thing, there was no need for lies.
Maybe she's one of those people who turns into a bat when you talk to them, and she just managed to hide it long enough to trick you.
That's great. So I just passed off the water of life to Ganon's minions.
Oh man, would they then use that on Ganon's gore bones?
That's what they need to mix with Link's ashes.
Together they form a paste.
Oh no! Gross! No! Ew!
It's the fabled resurrection paste.
Oh, there you go. Headcanon. I love it. This is the official Sacred Realms pod explanation for how one brings Ganon back to life. It's the dark paste. All right. Okay, cool. Let's get into part 6, which is our final thoughts, in which we let Matt wrap up this section of the game in as succinct a way as he can think to do. Matt, it's all you.
So this section of game starts out pretty strong until we get into our 4th dungeon, where we meet the absolute nemesis of all existence, culminating in a fairly satisfying, interesting boss fight. We get an awesome item in the raft that allows us to open up a whole new, we'll call it subcontinent, for exploration, something that this game has kind of been short on, which is really, really fantastic and kind of comes at a much needed place that breathes some new life into the game for all of us. We continue the section into the maze and Dungeon 5, which are really true high points of the game so far. I think this section of the game ends on a really strong note with heavily expanding Link's magical arsenal, as well as some really interesting exploration and dungeon diving that was pretty enjoyable all the way around. We continue to see some frustration with the famine economy of low magic drops and health being difficult, but overall think that we are kind of coming to a stronger point in the game and looking forward to finishing up our final 2 palaces and moving on to Death Valley in the next couple of episodes.
Well done, Matt. And I just want to say that I think famine economy is going to become one of our buzz terms for the remainder of this game. That was really well dropped there, Max. I think that that's very accurate of kind of the minute-to-minute experience of this game, and I think we're going to get a lot of mileage out of that term. So there you go. Appreciate it. But as always, well done on wrapping up the final thoughts there, Matt. That brings us to the end of the Sacred Realms Rundown. We will be back next week with another installment of the Sacred Realms Rundown, where we will talk about 2 more dungeons. We will get further into this game. There's going to be a lot more to talk about and a lot more to discuss. That brings us pretty close to the end of this episode. It's getting pretty late over here. As promised at the beginning of this episode, we have once again embarked upon a 2-hour bonanza experience. So that just seems to be what we do these days. Who knows if it'll ever get shorter? I don't know. We have a lot to talk about. Sorry about that, y'all. But also very grateful to have had Max on to really kind of hash some of this stuff out with us. Because one of the things I love about having you on, Max, is that you're able to frequently give terms to a lot of the things that we're kind of thinking and feeling. Your expertise is actually very invaluable in kind of like breaking down, thoughts and opinions about these games and the choices that they make. So really appreciate that, and really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, as always, it's a blast for me. It's always the highlight of my week. Also, I cannot wait to tell you more about why I think the combat in this game is very similar to Skyward Swords next time I'm on. So
Max.
Stay tuned.
Can't wait.
Max. No.
In an interesting way. Probably.
See, Matt thinks that you're sitting here trolling him for lulz, but I think you actually have a point to make. So I can back this up. Okay, I'm ready for it. Can't wait to get to it.
If you say so.
See, Matt, you thought you were getting picked on, but really, there's a nugget of gold here that we're going to uncover in a later episode. It's going to be a really good time. All right, I think we're about ready to get out of here. Max, real quick before we do that, would you just go ahead and let everybody know where they can follow you and where they can check out the Hyrule Interviews work that you're doing?
Yeah, so I maintain a database of interviews with all members of the Zelda development team over the years. In theory, we want to collect every interview that has ever happened, which is not a thing we're going to succeed at. I keep saying we. So far, it's just me. I'll find other volunteers someday. You can find my database at HyruleInterviews.com, or you can find us on Twitter, where I post daily quotes, from these interviews at Hyrule Interview. No S. And that should be of interest to anyone who just wants to know more about what's going through Zelda creators' heads as they design these games.
Yep, absolutely. Definitely go give that a like and a follow. Go check that out. It's going to be an excellent resource. Again, Max is frequently dropping a lot of this wisdom on us during the course of these episodes, but that is barely scratching the surface of the depth of like perspective and historical knowledge that is available over at Hyrule Interviews. So go check that out. It's a really an incredible project that he's undertaking. So Max, we definitely support you in that. Consider us volunteers in spirit, if not in doing actual work.
Thank you for your help.
Oh, anytime. It was a struggle, but we're here for you. Cool. Matt, I think we have a 5-star review that we want to read real quick before we get out of here. Yeah.
Absolutely. So just a reminder to everybody that we appreciate all the 5-star reviews. We are over 100 on the 5-star reviews now, which is really awesome. Appreciate everybody letting us know how much you've been enjoying the pod as much as we've been enjoying making it. So thank you, everybody. This one comes from Stephanie Lynn. She says, if you're ever looking for a Zelda podcast that breaks everything down from dungeons to the music, characters, side quests, and more, this is the podcast for you. I have a deep love for the Zelda games. I appreciate the time and effort that is put into this podcast. My most favorite Zelda game is Twilight Princess, Breath of the Wild, as it was tough to just choose one. Least favorite Phantom Hourglass is I kept rage quitting at the Temple of the Ocean King, but I recommend this podcast to everyone who loves and appreciates the Zelda games just like you guys do. So thank you for this podcast. thank you, Stephanie, for leaving us a good 5-star review and for being part of our wonderful community over on Discord and Patreon. Thank you for all the insights and inputs that you have in both of those places. So thanks everybody else who's left 5-star reviews, and please keep doing it. That's one way that we continue to get higher on the podcast ranking, and more people see our show that way. And that's exactly what we need, and to keep growing the community and growing the pod. So thanks everybody.
Absolutely. Y'all's time is very valuable, and we appreciate very much that you might ever choose to spend a chunk of it writing a review and posting it about our show. We appreciate that very much, and it means more to us than you will ever know. Because we never really expected this to go anywhere, and it's definitely gone some places. So that's an incredibly gratifying feeling, honestly. Like we feel very blessed by the community that we have. They truly are made up of excellent people. All right, I think it's time to get out of here. Sound good, Matt?
Let's do it. It's getting late.
It's getting late. If you enjoyed today's show and you would like a little extra Sacred Realms in your life, you can head over to patreon.com/Sacred Realms Pod and become a patron. If you've got no rupees, it is not a problem. 5-star Apple Podcast reviews are a great free way to support us. More reviews means that more people see our show. That makes us very happy, Hylians. Follow us on Twitter and Instagram @Sacred Realms Pod for updates on the podcast and for behind-the-scenes action. Sacred Realms will be back next Wednesday with our thoughts on the Adventure of Link Chapter 4, which is going to cover another 2 dungeons. And crap, which 2 dungeons are those? I think there's one of them has 3 eyes. Crap, where's Josh's document? Seriously, this is a good time to mention that we would have been completely lost in this whole process without Josh from Zelda Universe, who is truly...
You could also look on our Twitter where it's our pinned tweet, and our next 2 palaces are Palace on the Sea and 3-Eyed Rock Palace.
There you go. We'll be playing those 2 palaces next week, so that is what you've got to get caught up on if you want to do some podcast homework. Of course, The Adventure of Link can be played in a variety of places. It can be played on the original NES. It can be played on the NES Mini. It can be played on a variety of eShops, at least the ones that are still up and running. And it can be played on the Nintendo Switch Online NES service, which is the version that Matt and I are playing. Not the version that Max is playing. To play the version that Max is playing, just do a little Google, and I'm sure you'll figure it out. And it's totally fine. Don't worry about it.
We do not judge you.
We truly do not. But in the meantime, may your hearts be full. May your arrows never miss. We will catch y'all next week. Sacred Realms is an independent podcast production, which is produced, edited, and mixed by me, Lyndon Willoughby. Our music comes from Zelda and Chill by Mikkel and is graciously provided to us by Mikkel and Game Chops Records. Zelda and Chill is available to stream on Spotify or to purchase directly from GameChops.com. Finally, our thanks go to Nintendo for creating such exceptional and innovative experiences.
Bye!